When Sarah bought her century-old cottage, she dreamed of restoring its forgotten garden. Overgrown with wildflowers, ivy, and heirloom roses planted by the original owners, it had a haunting beauty that spoke of history. She carefully trimmed, cataloged, and preserved the plants, uncovering stone pathways and an old fountain along the way. But the neighborhood HOA saw something else. They fined her $5,000, declaring her yard unkempt, unattractive, and non-compliant. Sarah was crushed until she reached out to the local historical society, who sent experts to evaluate her garden. Within days, the city announced the garden was not only unique, but one of the last remaining examples of an early 1900s botanical design. It was designated a historic landmark, instantly valued at $500,000. The same garden that her HOA dismissed as ugly became the pride of the community, bringing recognition, protection, and new opportunities for preservation. Perception and value often exist in tension, especially when it comes to how people interpret beauty, order, and worth in our surroundings. A garden, for instance, is never just a collection of plants. It carries with it layers of meaning that shift depending on who is looking at it. To one person, wildflowers growing freely across a yard might appear messy, unkempt, or even neglected. To another, that same growth could represent biodiversity, a living piece of history, or a reminder of a community's cultural heritage. The lesson is that perception is subjective, while value often emerges when we take the time to look deeper and place something in its broader context. When an HOA finds a homeowner for what it calls an ugly garden, the focus is on conformity and surface-level appearance. HOAs tend to favor neatly trimmed hedges, manicured lawns, and uniformity across properties. Their goal, at least on paper, is to maintain neighborhood cohesion and preserve property values. However, this narrow lens can cause them to overlook something with genuine significance. What looks like disorder may actually be intentional preservation of heirloom plants, traditional design methods, or even endangered species that hold value far beyond a simple aesthetic preference. In this sense, the HOA represents the short-term, surface-level perception of beauty, while the designation of a garden as a historic landmark represents recognition of long-term, cultural, and even financial value. This contrast teaches us that value is not always immediately visible. It requires curiosity and an openness to perspectives beyond our own. Consider how museums curate objects that once may have been considered ordinary or outdated. A centuries-old chair, faded and scratched, might not seem attractive by modern standards, but when placed in historical context, it becomes a window into craftsmanship, culture, and everyday life of a different time. Similarly, a garden that does not fit into today's standards of landscaping may embody stories about migration, architecture, climate adaptation, or the traditions of families who lived there generations ago. Perception says ugly, but value reveals important. Education plays a key role in bridging this gap. People are more likely to dismiss what they do not understand. When communities learn about the significance of native plants, historic landscaping techniques, or the role of biodiversity in preventing erosion and supporting pollinators, their perceptions begin to shift. What once looked like weeds may be recognized as rare wildflowers. What seemed like neglect may be understood as intentional preservation. By encouraging awareness, we empower individuals to see beyond appearances and appreciate the deeper value of what surrounds them. The financial dimension cannot be ignored. The story of a garden fined by an HOA only to be later valued at $500,000 as a historic landmark highlights how short-sighted judgments can have real economic consequences. Property deemed unattractive in one moment may later appreciate in value precisely because of its uniqueness. In real estate, heritage and originality often command higher prices than uniformity. What appears to reduce neighborhood value may in fact enhance it once the right authorities recognize its importance. This proves that value is dynamic and evolves as society learns to interpret meaning differently over time. Ultimately, the tension between perception and value challenges us to be thoughtful observers rather than quick judges. It reminds us that beauty is not a fixed standard dictated by rules, but a fluid concept shaped by history, culture, and individual experience. When we pause to ask not just how something looks, but what it represents, we open the door to uncovering hidden worth. That shift in mindset not only prevents injustices like unfair fines, but also enriches communities by preserving legacies that might otherwise have been lost. The next time something strikes us as unattractive, it is worth asking, unattractive to whom, and in comparison to what? Often, the very things dismissed at first glance become the treasures future generations will fight to protect.
The power of advocacy lies in the simple truth that change often begins with one voice willing to speak up. Advocacy does not always mean protesting in the streets or hiring expensive lawyers. It can be as straightforward as asking questions, seeking out knowledge, and reaching out to the right people who can shed light on a situation. In the case of someone whose garden is misjudged by their HOA, it was the act of contacting the local historical society that transformed a penalty into an opportunity. Without that single act of advocacy, the story would have ended with a fine and lingering frustration. Instead, it became a demonstration of how advocacy can uncover hidden resources, protect individual rights, and ultimately create positive change for both individuals and communities. Advocacy begins with recognizing when something feels unjust. Many people accept authority without question because challenging it feels intimidating. Homeowners associations, city councils, or even workplace supervisors can appear to have the final word. Yet history is full of examples where unfair decisions were overturned because someone dared to speak up. In the context of housing and property, advocacy is especially powerful because it protects personal investments and preserves cultural heritage. When individuals take the time to research, document, and present their case, they often find that the rules imposed on them are not as rigid as they first appear. The key is persistence and knowing that one's voice has value. Another aspect of advocacy is understanding the importance of allies. Few changes occur in isolation. In this story, the homeowner could have paid the fine and tried to move on, but instead, they connected with experts who had the authority and knowledge to reframe the garden's worth. This is an essential lesson. Sometimes advocacy is not about convincing the original decision makers, but about finding the right audience who can appreciate and support your perspective. Historical societies, city planners, environmentalists, and legal advisors often bring credibility and influence that an individual alone might not have. Building these connections creates a stronger platform for one's cause. Educationally, advocacy also teaches the importance of evidence. Strong advocacy is not built on emotion alone, but on facts, documentation, and logical reasoning. For example, if an HOA insists a garden is non-compliant, the homeowner might gather records of the property's age, research the species of plants present, and compile information showing the cultural or ecological value of the landscape. When these findings are presented clearly, they shift the conversation from personal preference to objective significance. This transformation is what compels institutions like city governments to take notice. Advocacy is not just about resisting, it is about presenting an informed, compelling case that others cannot ignore. The ripple effects of advocacy also go beyond the individual. When one person successfully challenges an unfair ruling, it sets a precedent for others. A garden recognized as a historic landmark does not just protect one property, it sparks awareness in the broader community about the importance of preservation. Neighbors begin to see value where they once saw nuisance, and city leaders may start to rethink how they evaluate historic and cultural assets. Advocacy, in this sense, becomes a catalyst for collective learning. It empowers communities to balance progress with respect for heritage. Finally, advocacy builds resilience. Even if the initial attempts do not succeed, the act of standing up for what one believes in strengthens confidence and fosters problem-solving skills. It teaches individuals not to accept surface-level judgments and to dig deeper for truth and fairness. This mindset is invaluable in every area of life, from protecting one's rights at work to ensuring access to fair treatment in public spaces. It shows that while systems and authorities may appear daunting, they are not infallible. With persistence, strategy, and the courage to ask questions, ordinary people can influence outcomes that once felt impossible. The story of a fined garden turned landmark is a vivid reminder that advocacy is not about fighting blindly, but about seeking the right pathways for recognition and justice. It is proof that a single act of speaking up can transform a burden into a triumph, not only saving someone from an unfair penalty, but also unlocking value that benefits an entire community.
Resilience against authority is one of the most important traits an individual can cultivate when navigating conflicts with organizations, institutions, or governing bodies. Authority figures and groups often position themselves as final decision-makers, but history shows that their rulings are not always fair, objective, or even legal. The ability to remain resilient in the face of these pressures can mean the difference between quietly accepting an unjust outcome and standing strong to reveal a greater truth. In the context of a homeowner fined by their HOA, resilience was the bridge between discouragement and victory. Instead of simply paying the fine and moving on, the homeowner chose to persist, believing there was more to their garden than what the HOA saw. This perseverance demonstrates how resilience protects not only individual rights, but also values that extend far beyond one person's property. Resilience begins with mindset. When an authority hands down a penalty or restriction, the immediate instinct for many people is to comply, even if they feel the decision is wrong. This response often stems from fear of escalating conflict, fear of retaliation, or fear of additional costs. However, resilience requires reframing the situation. Rather than viewing authority as unchallengeable, resilient individuals recognize that authority is simply one perspective, backed by rules, which can often be interpreted, amended, or even overturned. This shift in mindset allows people to see possibilities where others only see dead ends. It also teaches the valuable lesson that fairness is not always given freely. It must sometimes be fought for. Another critical aspect of resilience against authority is the ability to withstand pressure. HOAs, for example, can be persistent in enforcing their rules, often sending repeated warnings, levying fines, and threatening further action. Without resilience, this constant pressure can wear down even the most determined person. Resilience means not giving in to intimidation, but standing firm and seeking out every available resource. It also involves patience, as challenges against authority can take time to resolve. The process of appealing fines, gathering evidence, or seeking official recognition, such as a historic designation, rarely happens overnight. Resilient individuals accept that setbacks may occur along the way, but they do not let temporary losses define the final outcome. Resilience also fosters creativity and problem-solving. When authority blocks one path, it encourages people to find another. In the case of the ugly garden, resilience meant not confining the battle to HOA meetings where the majority might have already been against the homeowner. Instead, it meant looking outward, contacting historical societies, city officials, and experts who had a different kind of authority. This redirection not only provided new opportunities, but also shifted the balance of power.
The HOA's opinion became less important once the city stepped in with recognition and protection. Resilience is therefore not just about enduring pressure, but about finding alternative strategies that reframe the entire situation. Importantly, resilience against authority helps preserve individuality. Rules and regulations often push people toward conformity, valuing sameness over uniqueness. Without resilience, communities risk becoming bland and devoid of the cultural richness that comes from diversity of expression. By standing strong against the HOA's demand for uniform landscaping, the homeowner preserved a garden that reflected history, beauty, and uniqueness. This act of resilience ensured that heritage was not erased in the name of conformity. On a broader level, it serves as a reminder that resilience protects diversity, innovation, and creativity in all parts of life. Finally, resilience builds legacy. When one person resists authority successfully, it sends a powerful message to others. Unfair rules can be challenged, and change is possible. This inspires others to question authority in their own lives, not for the sake of defiance, but to protect fairness and integrity. In communities, resilient individuals often become examples that encourage collective courage, helping groups stand together when necessary. Over time, these acts of resilience shift the balance between authority and individuals, reminding institutions that their power is not absolute, but accountable to the people they serve. Resilience against authority, therefore, is not just an act of resistance, it is an act of preservation, empowerment, and progress. It ensures that voices are not silenced by intimidation, that individuality is not erased by conformity, and that fairness has the chance to prevail even in systems that seem stacked against it. The story of the Find Garden becoming a historic landmark illustrates this perfectly. Without resilience, the garden would have been dismissed as non-compliant. With resilience, it was recognized as priceless.
From finds to fortune is a powerful reminder of how quickly circumstances can shift when perspective changes and deeper truths come to light. At first, being fined by an HOA for an ugly garden feels like a punishment, a loss, and even a public embarrassment. $5,000 is not a small amount, and such a penalty suggests that the garden has negative value, dragging down the appearance and worth of the neighborhood. Yet within a single day, the same garden was transformed into something of immense worth when the city recognized it as a historic landmark valued at $500,000. This dramatic reversal illustrates the principle that loss can be temporary, setbacks can pave the way for opportunity, and what seems like a burden can sometimes become a blessing when the full picture is revealed. The educational lesson here lies in understanding that fortune often hides behind adversity. Challenges such as fines, restrictions, or criticisms force individuals to reconsider their position, seek new solutions, and look for meaning in places they might not have otherwise explored. If the HOA had never issued the fine, the homeowner might not have contacted the Historical Society. Without that contact, the hidden value of the garden might never have been uncovered. In this way, the fine, though intended as punishment, became the catalyst for discovery and recognition. This demonstrates how obstacles, rather than being purely negative, can sometimes be disguised opportunities waiting to be revealed. The shift from fines to fortune also teaches us the importance of context in determining value. To the HOA, the garden violated a set of modern landscaping rules and thus appeared worthless. To the city and historians, it represented one of the last surviving examples of early 20th century garden design, making it not only beautiful, but historically irreplaceable. This dramatic reversal turned what was perceived as a liability into an asset worth $500,000. Educationally, this highlights how value is never absolute. It depends on perspective, knowledge, and timing. What looks unimportant today may, under the right lens, become priceless tomorrow. Understanding this helps individuals avoid hasty judgments and encourages them to look at challenges with curiosity instead of despair.
Another critical takeaway is that financial fortune is not just about money. It is about recognition, legacy, and long-term benefit. A $5,000 fine is temporary, but a $500,000 landmark designation carries with it protection, prestige, and potential for future opportunities. The homeowner now has a property that is not only more valuable, but also a part of the community's cultural narrative. This elevation from personal burden to collective treasure shows that fortune often extends beyond the individual, benefiting entire neighborhoods or even cities. It proves that sometimes what feels like personal misfortune can evolve into shared wealth when it uncovers value that others can also appreciate. The story also educates us about the unpredictability of outcomes. Many people treat authorities' decision as final and assume that once a fine or punishment is given, the matter is closed. Yet here, the same decision that appeared definitive turned out to be just the beginning of a much larger journey. This unpredictability means that individuals should be cautious about interpreting setbacks as permanent. Fortune can emerge from unexpected places, and sometimes the very act of being challenged creates the path to greater success. By holding on to resilience, people position themselves to take advantage of these shifts when they occur. Finally, moving from fines to fortune teaches the importance of persistence and faith in one's vision. If the homeowner had accepted the HOA's judgment at face value, the story would have ended there, with money lost and dreams diminished. By refusing to give up, they unlocked value that others had overlooked. This transformation demonstrates the larger life lesson that fortune often follows those who persist despite obstacles, who are willing to seek new paths, and who trust that what they are protecting has worth, even if it is not immediately recognized by others. The leap from being penalized to being rewarded shows how fragile and flexible the line between loss and gain can be. In every area of life, whether careers, education, personal relationships, or community projects, what starts as a setback may be the very thing that reveals greater opportunities. The fine was not the end of the story, but the spark that uncovered a hidden fortune, proving that adversity, when met with persistence and insight, can lead to rewards beyond expectations.